It was one of those days when I went for a walk in Trinity Belwoods Park, located 3 kilometers west of downtown Toronto. As my eyes wandered around the trees, watching the leaves dance in the wind, I heard faint music. While encountering live performances in Toronto's parks is common, the sounds I heard were different. It didn't resemble a concert, so I started walking towards the source of the sound, accelerating my steps with curiosity. The path ahead was splitting into two. As I pondered which way to go, a darkness in the middle of the wide, sloping, grassy area caught my attention. The music seemed to be coming from that direction. I continued walking with curiosity. When I got closer, I saw a dark-haired man, dressed in black from head to toe, sitting on a blanket with his eyes closed. He held a thick black book with blood-red symbols on the cover. While I continued to scrutinize the man in amazement, he suddenly opened his eyes and stared at me. "Stop watching me from there and come sit. I have something to tell you," he said, and the music stopped. To be honest, I was a bit frightened. "Thank you, but I'm late. I need to go home." "Have a good day," I said, and turned away. "Do you not want to hear the story of a Satanist?" he asked, increasing my curiosity. I actually had no hurry. Moreover, it would be silly to say no to such an interesting encounter with a paranormal story. Sitting a bit further away, I said, "I'm listening." He immediately started explaining. "When I was 3 years old, our family moved from South America to Canada. My father is somewhat religious, but my mother is a devout Catholic. After the move to Canada, my mother became even more devoted to religion. She started taking me to church services when I was 9. We had weekly and monthly rituals that we attended without fail. Although I was not happy about it, I tolerated it for my mother's sake. But unlike my mother, my interest was not in the church, but in the darkness. When I visited my friend's house to study, I saw a magic book in his father's library, and that's when I realized. I felt the darkness in my bones. I remember how happy I was the night the power went out at our house. My siblings were scared, but I was incredibly happy. I was singing to myself about how much I loved the darkness until I fell asleep. By the time I turned 16, I went to spend summer vacations with my aunt in our homeland. My mother asked my aunt to take me to church regularly, explaining my interest in darkness. So my aunt, thinking it would be good for me, decided to take me to a mass exorcism ceremony in their church that week. It really did me good. At first, everything was as boring as usual. The Bible was read. Prayers were said kneeling in front of the statue of Jesus. But after a while, the priest called some people over. A door opened behind him, and 12 people entered. The 3 women in the front moved to the center, and the 9 people surrounded them. Those forming the circle, following the priest's signal, raised their hands, and looking at the 3 women in the center, they began to make strange movements, uttering deep sounds and speaking something in Latin. At the same time, everyone else in the church was praying, except for me. I was watching in amazement without blinking my eyes. At some point, one of the women screamed and collapsed on the floor. Then the other 2. Those surrounding them continued the ritual without disturbing it. The women on the ground were writhing, crying, and screaming. Almost half an hour passed like this. Then suddenly, the voices of the women stopped. Immediately after, I felt a pain in my head, and my eyes went dark. I passed out. Since that day, my interest in darkness and black magic has increased significantly. And after returning to Canada when the summer ended, the pressure from my family increased. Living in that house, where every wall except the bathroom was adorned with dozens of crosses, every corner revealed a statue of Jesus, and the Bible was constantly read, turned into torture. I endured for a long time, but one night I packed my bag and escaped to New York. I waited for a while, but the man had finished speaking and closed his eyes again. However, I was very curious about the rest of his story. Unable to resist, I asked, "What happened next?" He made no sound. His eyes were still closed. Hoping to catch your interest, I said, "Thank you for sharing your story. You met the right person because I really love writing stories, especially horror and mysterious stories." The man slowly opened his eyes. He looked at me and smiled, saying, "I know." Then, for a moment, the whites of his eyes turned black. Then he returned to normal immediately, but that was enough for me. I got up and quickly walked away. Accelerating, my heart was still pounding. What that dark man told me was going through my mind. The strange event he experienced at the end of his narrative, the strange moments I felt while talking to him. When all of this came together, there was tension within me. But on the other hand, I also wanted to know the rest of the story. A few days later, I was walking in Trinity Belwoods Park again. After our first meeting, I tried to stay away from that area of the park for a while, but the curiosity inside me drew me back there. Would I see that dark man again? Maybe he would tell the rest of his story. I wandered around different corners of the park, but for a while, I found nothing. Just when I was about to despair, in a more secluded and quiet part of the park, under a tree, I saw the same dark-haired man sitting. I approached him and greeted him. "Hello, do you remember me?" I said. The man slowly raised his head and smiled. "Yes, we talked the other day. You wanted to hear my story." "Yes, it was really interesting, but I want to know the rest of the story. What happened next?" I asked. The man pondered for a moment, then nodded. "Yes, let me continue. After fleeing to New York, I decided to chart my own path. I didn't give up my interest in black magic. On the contrary, I deepened it." According to his story, he met many secret organizations and groups in New York related to dark arts. These groups taught him different spells, rituals, and mystic knowledge. In this process, the dark-haired man found his own path, gained strength, and underwent a kind of initiation. However, he realized that there was a price to pay for this power. According to his story, one night he encountered a dark entity in his dream. The entity offered him a choice: either give up his soul and gain more power, or abandon this path and live a normal life. The dark man chose a normal life by suppressing his desire for power. While he was telling this, his eyes turned black for a longer period this time. Then he focused on me again. "Now I am here, in some kind of balance. I control my power, but I couldn't completely reject the dark side. I know it's waiting in the shadows," he said. At this point in the story, there was a sense of confusion within me. Was the man telling the truth, or was it just a story? However, one thing was certain. The strange feeling I had during that encounter made me think that this story was not just an ordinary tale. The dark-haired man smiled and said, "You are interesting too. Maybe one day you'll find me here again. Perhaps then I'll share more with you." I said my thanks and watched as he got up, slowly fading into the park. And there I thought about how Trinity Belwoods Park had transformed for me since that day. It was no longer just a green park. It held a mystery that I was trying to unravel.